Welcome to the program. My name is Tim Shaw, and I'm delighted to be your host and moderator for the Grain Producers Australia election webinar, Tony Windsor and how to navigate minority government. For the next 60 minutes, we're going to be exploring the experiences that the former member for New England, Tony Windsor, had, and certainly that pivotal role in the formation of a minority government with Prime Minister Julia Gillard during 2010 to 2013. Looking at the 47th Parliament of Australia and the arrival of the independent community-based Teal members of Parliament, it's been a very interesting time, a broadening of that crossbench. The 47th Parliament, what's the 48th Parliament going to be like? We're going to find out from May the 3rd, when those votes are counted. And as Prime Minister Albanese said on the Channel 9 leaders debate last night, he will under no circumstances form an agreement with the Greens political party. And Peter Dutton, the leader of the coalition, said, "Are you sure about that? You've got preferences going everywhere." Well, we'll see what happens after the May 3 election. But before we get started with our very special guest, I want to introduce Colin Bettles, Chief Executive Officer for Grain Producers Australia, to make a welcome and thanks. Over to you, Colin.
Thanks, Tim. I'll keep it brief, which, as Tony knows, is highly unusual for me. He once accused me, as a press gallery journalist, I was asking a question of Bill Gates at a Grand Hall event, and they were watching on the monitor from Aussies inside Parliament House, and they said, "We actually thought you were the speaker there for a while, Cole, not a journalist asking a question." I want to say a sincere thanks to Tim and Tony. Tim Shaw is an experienced press gallery journalist and just an all-round good guy, and Tony Windsor, as Tim said in the intro, former member for New England, also a good guy, in my view, someone who I spent a lot of time within the hung Parliament learning from. And but most of all, from the GPA point of view, he is an active grain farmer. And we did talk about farming a lot, as well as the politics of the Parliament at that time. So the purpose of this webinar is how to navigate a minority government. We're in the middle of an election campaign. GPA's got election policy platform that's out there. And so we want to talk about how the agriculture sector can do itself a favour and learn how to navigate a minority parliament as well, and learn from someone who's lived through it in the New South Wales Parliament.
Thanks, Colin.
So thank you very much, and thanks everyone for joining and listening and learning. And we're encouraging questions as well. We've got some that have been sent in beforehand, but we're also encouraging people to send in some questions as we go on the chat. Tim, you'll provide those instructions. Thank you.
Yep, thank you. Thank you, Colin. We all know that Tony Windsor is well known for his pivotal role in the hung Parliament from 2010 to 2013, but his experience extends far beyond that unique chapter in Australian political history. First and foremost, he's a grain producer working the land. He was on the tractor today and helping run the family farm in northern New South Wales. What we want to give you all watching an opportunity is for Tony to be able to share those experiences, not only in his experience of 2010, 2013, but his certain observance. It's a hard habit to break. The observance of how the crossbench from an observer's point of view has been operating and may operate in the future. He's also going to speak about, we hope, the numbers in the federal parliament that have evolved since then. This fracturing of the political vote system, the drop in the primary votes of the two major political parties, and how that's impacting now in terms of the formation of the 48th Parliament. So, Tony Windsor, it's great to see your smiling face. Welcome to the webinar.
Well, thank you very much, Tim. Thanks, Cole. And I guess I get straight into it, do I?
Let's go back to 17 days before the decision to back the formation of a government led by Julia Gillard. Can you just give us a snapshot of the kind of experience you had as an independent, the kind of people that were speaking with you. We know Bob Brown had a wattle signing ceremony with Julia Gillard. We know that you, Rob Oakeshott, and Bob Catter had become a group of three. Andrew Wilkie had looked to poker machines in Tasmania, but just reflect and take us back to 2010.
Well, before I do that, if I could, Tim, firstly, thanks for the opportunity to be on here. I might just give people who haven't got a clue about me, excuse me, a bit of a snapshot. I was in two hung parliaments, one back in 1991 and the 2010 one that you referred to. And I was in another parliament where there was a majority of one. But I think my most successful parliament actually was one of the state parliaments I was in, where there was a majority of 16. And someone might ask me why later on if they're particularly interested. But prior to going into parliament, I was involved in farming. Come from a family farmer. My father was killed on a tractor tractor accident when I was 8. My mother kept the place together, 3 boys to raise. Father didn't leave a will, all those sorts of consequences back in those days. But anyway, we ended up farming. I was a member of New South Wales Farmers. I was on the Grains Council prior to, as a New South Wales Farmers delegate prior to 1991. And we're currently farming now. We farm, we crop probably, I think, something like 22,000 acres and a few cattle running around, but run by our eldest son, and our other children are on smaller farms as well. So I've been involved in agriculture all my life. I think I can claim, and maybe someone else will claim it, that having the longest paddock of no-till farming probably in Australia, which I think it's in its 47th year now. So I've had a lucky life in a lot of ways. Some would say losing your father early doesn't mean you're lucky, but I've enjoyed the jobs that I've done. I loved farming. I really enjoyed politics, both state and federal. And I'm back farming now, watching the younger people deal with all the technology that's around, and that's, it's just great to watch with the young people in agriculture. Going to your question, though, there's a bit of the politician in me, isn't there? But the 2010 experience was one that I won't remember, but it was one that wasn't unusual to me, seeing I'd been in one back in 91. But it was one where all you had to do really was get to work. We were elected to represent a constituency. In that particular case, there was an extra workload, and we just got on with the job. But it was a very interesting time. There were a lot of intense media, the News Limited and some of the other idiots that were involved at the time, trying to create this sort of chaotic, unstable view that the parliament would collapse, it wouldn't last long. Tony Abbott perpetuated that a bit. And regrettably, I think the farm organisations fell into the trap at that particular stage, that particular parliament wouldn't last long at all. And maybe a bit later on, I'll talk about meetings I had with the NFF during that period of time and their responses to various issues that were raised at the time. So, having looked at that, experienced that parliament actually worked. And it did so for a number of reasons. And obviously, there was a lot of legislation passed. I don't necessarily believe that should be the judgment of a good or a bad parliament. But one of the things that it did do, and it may happen after the election, where I think we may have a hung parliament. It'll either be Labor by a slim margin or a minority government, but was that a lot of people don't realise that the committees of the parliaments reflect the nature of the parliament. So in a majority parliament, the committee chairman is always of the majority party, or chairperson always of the majority party, and has the majority in those committees. So that if a committee discusses an issue of great concern to the Australian public, the government of the day, in a majority sense, can always sidetrack it and push it off to one side and say, no, we don't want to go there. In a minority government, the committees reflect the nature of the parliament again. So what it does is not only empower the independent members of the parliament in that minority sense, but it empowers all the members of the parliament to actually deal with an issue, a substantive issue the committees look at, and actually make a contribution that's outside the party. And I noticed that on a number of occasions. I chaired the committee that the Regional Development Committee that looked at, or one of the issues that looked at was fly in, fly out. Another one was the Murray-Darling Basin plan, etc. And that committee process, in my view, led to a plan. A lot of people don't agree with it, but that's fair enough. But I think you've got to have some sort of plan in terms of the biggest river system in the nation. But I think it shows the sorts of things that will happen if, in fact, we do go into another minority situation.
I think it's important what you reflected there in terms of the committee work. And as you say, in a minority government, there are, and as we saw in the 47th Parliament, many of those candidates, the Teal members, have been directly involved in that committee work. Just from that work, is it a critical point based on the expertise of the independent member bringing that? We've got two medical doctors, the member for Kooyong, the member for McKellar. We've got experienced foreign affairs journalists in the member for Goldstein. Yeah, are these kind of personal attributes that add to that committee work? Or is it the fact that those with direct interest will find a very friendly and listening ear from someone like yourself, particularly on matters of FIFO and certainly the Murray-Darling Basin? Was that your experience?
Yes, it was. And people often say an independent member of parliament is sort of footloose and fancy-free, sitting out there on their own. Well, that's not the case at all. And in fact, what you have access to, if you're serious about an issue, and one of the things I'd encourage any of the viewers from an ag perspective, only take serious issues to people. Don't take frivolous political issues to them. But if you're serious about an issue, you will get a lot of people who have greater expertise than you actually getting in touch with you. So you develop a network of people that don't want to play the politics, that actually want to be involved in addressing a specific issue and getting an outcome from it. And I think the independents are currently in the parliament. I'm a great fan of Helen Haynes, for instance. I think she's a great parliamentarian from a rural perspective, as well as a parliamentarian. That she's just a good member of parliament, and hopefully she'll be re-elected. But the people you refer to as well, I don't think we've seen a parliament with independents or outsiders to the major parties with the expertise that these people have had. I've never seen someone like David Pocock come to grips with the political process, and the same applies to Zoe Danielson, Monique Ryan, Kate Cheney, etc. These people have come to grips with what being in Parliament is about, and actually being able to make contributions virtually from day one. If people don't remember anything else I say, don't forget the Senate. Everybody's sort of, it's going to be a hung Parliament, it's going to be a hung Parliament. It may or it may not. My guess is it probably will be. But irrespective of that, the Senate is going to be a hung Parliament anyway. Anything that gets through the lower house will have to get through the Senate. And there's a lot of people in the Senate that people, in the general public just ignore. Well, that'd be the silliest thing you could ever do. If there's a majority government, I'd still, from an agricultural perspective, be developing relationships with those that are in the Senate, because that's where a lot of the legislation will be modified, amended, or changed, or thrown out.
I think that's a very valid point. You talk about Senator David Pocock from the ACT, someone that has been able to embrace the briefs that have come across a very busy desk there, and a man in his mid-30s who's been able to, from a sporting background, to bring that, many would say, a common sense approach, Tony. Is that something that you feel that yourself, Rob Oakeshott, Andrew Wilkie, Bob Catter, others in that Gillard government and parliament were able to caucus in an informal way and to be able to bring ideas to the table that did actually influence how other independents made decisions on legislation?
Well, some of your question is for others to judge. I think in the main, and I had a lot to do with Rob Oakeshott, a lot to do with Oakeshott, or Buckshot as I call him. Bob was a bit more erratic. Andrew Wilkie is a good guy, hard worker. But I think what we attempted to do was address the job that was in front of us and do it as best we could. You know, we made mistakes, there's no doubt about that. Don't ask me what they were, I can't remember them, but there would have been mistakes. There would have been things we could have done better, things that were rushed. But we tried to do what we thought was best on a whole range of issues. And I think the other substantive thing too, and I've said it to a number of independent candidates, and I like to think that I did this, don't try and become the government. You know, if it is a minority parliament, all those other people who are elected to parliament are there for a reason too. Don't suddenly get this great rush of blood that you suddenly know everything and you better, you know, a bit like our good friend Donald Trump. Don't suddenly believe you know everything and that you're all powerful in a circumstance in the government. That you might last a few weeks and then no one will, including the press, will take you seriously, and neither should they. You know, I think in terms of developing issues, whether it be in the ag sector or anywhere else, stay logical, flesh out what you want to actually talk about, forget about the bullshit and the politics that someone told you down the road or a local member said, oh yeah, you want to be doing this. Don't become captured by the political process. And one of my grievances with agricultural representation, particularly the National Farmers Federation, is that it has, over the decades, become captured. And in the parliament, well, when I was there, and I presume it's much the same talking to people that are still there, it was actually taken for granted, and in a lot of cases laughed at by both sides of parliament. You know, the Labor Party didn't pay much attention to them, and the Liberal and National parties didn't either. They paid them lip service, but didn't pay much attention to what they had to say. So, you know, that's the worst sort of representation, and they were captured. There's no doubt about that. You go back to the days of the third tranche of Telstra, the sale. You know, I remember standing not far from Peter Corrie. He was the president of the NFF at the time, when he made this proclamation that John Howard had just told him that the equity of access to telecommunications, both in price and service levels, would be enshrined in legislation. Enshrined in legislation. That's pretty solid stuff. Nothing happened. Nothing happened. So, and even today, we're still, people out there are still battling to get communication services that should have been put on years ago. The NBN was similar. The game was played. If there's, in my view, if there's ever been two issues where politics shouldn't have entered into, it was the NBN and climate change. And I know there'll be farmers out there saying, "Oh, bloody climate change! Why they're going to close us down? It's the Russians or it's someone else." We and my family, my three children are all in agriculture, and my nephews and nieces are in agriculture. We are the potential victims, first on the line in terms of the risks associated with dramatic weather events. And for people to still be out there doubting the science on this sort of stuff and being captured by the politics, because, Gina Reinhardt or whoever, Murdoch, or those people think it's best that we just stall the place. I think it's a very sad thing. I think, we've got to recognise some of the scientific realities and actually try and address those. And agriculture should be a very important part of, be an ingredient in terms of the solutions. We've got some incredible people in this country. Look at the development of no-till farming, for instance, over the year. I was a little bitty player, but our scientists were right at the forefront of that. Look at some of the robot technology in terms of agriculture now. We've got one of these things running around with a spot sprayer on it, and there's no one there. Yeah, it was built in Toowoomba. There's a lot of technology out there that historically we've been at the forefront of, and I think that's where one of the things where we need to reposition ourselves as a global player again. What we've done in terms of black soil farming in terms of Africa, for instance, and Ukraine, just quite phenomenal. And I don't think we credit those people with trying to address extreme weather events, climatic events that have been commonplace in the Sudan and other parts of Malawi and wherever. There's real potential there for agriculture to grow in that direction as well.
Tony, science and technology since 2010, the last 15 years, you've absolutely hit it on the head. Ed Husey, Science Technology Minister, addressed the National Press Club. And at the end of that address was asked the question, where should the bulk of grant and research money be dedicated? And of course, did we hear agriculture? Did we hear, the science in regional Australia? No, we did not. We heard a lot about medical technology. Is this part of the role of broadening the power of independence to be educated about the fact that Australia's food bowls, we produce food enough for 70 million people a year? Is this part of where dealing with the minority government and being able to take them on that journey, is that something that independents should look at in the 48 Parliament post May 3?
Well, it's definitely something that the advocates for agriculture, food production, science, technology, those people you talk about, they're the ones that should be promoting that. One of the things I'd suggest, you don't have to pay attention to me, but I'd be treating these people, irrespective of whether it's a hung parliament or not. A lot of them will be in the parliament, and they won't have a day-to-day living experience of agriculture, and that's not a bad thing. But they will have logical brains, and those women you mentioned earlier, they're smart women. Then they're not going to get bluffed with dodgy politics. So I wouldn't go near them if the issue is about playing dodgy games with them and being captured by the political process. They are the ones that I'd be actually targeting to look at the positives of agriculture, and whilst doing that, educate them and the very positive things that do happen. There will be issues that will come up. And one I was talking to Cole about the other day was the gramoxone issue, for instance. We've developed a business model in the cropping sector. I'm talking about just for the moment. And we're grain producers, Australia, they're croppers. We've developed a business model that's based on not tilling the soil for a whole range of reasons, both soil-related, soil health, erosion, infiltration rates, all the things you're well aware of. Therein lies an issue that should be addressed. And I'll just use that as an example. Rather than just hurtle into the parliament and say, we've got to have gramoxone. We've got to have gramoxone. We can't exist without it. Well, I think there again, we've got to go back to the science and you can't be, agriculture is about agricultural science. But a lot of in the farming community accept the science when they feel good about it and then say, no, that's bullshit. We don't want to hear about that. And that's fine. But I wouldn't run those sorts of arguments past these highly intelligent individuals that are likely to be in the next parliament. If you're trying to influence on an issue, I'd be arguing that we strengthen the science on some of these things rather than weaken it. And, I know I've seen Peter Dutton, it goes back to the days of Tony Abbott, and a lot of farmers would agree, let's get rid of red tape. Let's get rid of red tape. Well, in red tape, there are certain provisions that actually do good things for agriculture, which, some members of parliament would be rushing to get rid of red tape because they can take everything out. But I think the farm sector needs to find out what it really needs in terms of oversight in relation to various issues. And I'll just give you one example. The water trigger. You may not know what that is, not many people do, but it was a legislative arrangement that it was one of the demands I made of Julia Gillard, and she to her credit honoured it. But it was to give some scientific oversight in terms of major coal mine and coal seam gas extractive industries and the potential impact it would have on our water resources. Absolutely critical in our country, but it was to be scientifically based. Now, Tony Abbott and others saw that as just another bit of red tape. Jackie Lambie didn't. Jackie Lambie actually, and it might surprise some people, Clive Palmer. And these are people that came into the parliament after I'd left, but the coalition had tried to remove the water trigger on a couple of occasions, and people like Jackie Lambie, Clive Palmer, others in the Senate stopped it. And that's still out there. And the coalition is still, and the government, the current government, they've floated that they may well want to get rid of it as well. I think the farm sector has a valuable role to play in relation to this. If they want their water resources preserved, you just can't come in for the science one day and then come out again the other day. They've got to determine what process you're actually going to use. And I think the water trigger is one of those that it can be looked at, obviously, but one where the Senate played a valuable role.
Yeah. Question from Andrew Whitelaw, and talking about your references to the NFF, is the agricultural industry apolitical enough, Tony? Is it a structural thing where which voices need to be heard? And that includes the entire industry itself. Certainly you've referenced science. We've got the APVMA, we've got the NFF, whose voices as a collective voice need to effectively sign off and therefore be able to direct a consensus policy on agriculture on very important matters.
Well, I've been critical of the NFF for years, but it is difficult to run a federation of a whole range of interests. There's no doubt about that. It's a very difficult thing. And then for financial reasons, they've brought in all these other groups that are in the supply chain. That's fair enough, but they're not farmers. And they have an influence in shaping policy as well. The shame of it, in a sense, is not the people who are on the National Farmers Federation. There's a lot of very good people there. Is that those in Parliament virtually look at it as a joke. As a practicing farmer, that was one of the things that really hurt me a lot, because I came out of the New South Wales Farmers organisation before I went into Parliament the first time. That was a hung Parliament, and the first bloke I went to see was John White. Some of the older members who were viewing this was the CEO of the New South Wales Farmers, and a great Australian. And I think Peter Taylor, Angus's father, he may well have been president back in those days. And I asked them, I said, we've got a hung parliament. What are the sorts of things that I can do to help agriculture? And John White, as quick as a flash, came out with a whole range of issues, substantive issues, not rubbish stuff. Third party, I'm just trying to think of the just terms legislation.
Yes.
Been around for years, sitting there. No one had acted on it. Oh, no, you can't do that, can't do that. I said, well, we're going to do it. And it came in 1991, where people had, these properties had been placed under duress because some government had said, oh, we might build a dam there in 50 years' time. What's that do to an individual? But I did a similar thing with the NFF in 2010. In fact, I had 2 meetings. The board went down, sat down and said, well, we've got a hung parliament. And there've been some suggestions in terms of the climate change, the emissions trading scheme and whatever else. I said, I'm here to listen to what do you want to do? Give me a piece of paper, give me something. Nothing. They had already, well, there was something, I'll get to that in a minute. They had already been captured by the political process because Abbott and Co and others had said, this thing won't last. This hung parliament won't last. They'll be gone within 3 months. And if you guys have anything, people have told me this, they're absolutely threatened. If you guys have anything to do with these idiots, when we get it back into power, you'll be ruled out of the game. One bloke, as I left, I said, well, you're not, I'm paraphrasing here, because you're not giving me anything. One bloke tore up a piece of paper, tore the corner off it, and scribbled with a pencil on it, do something about the potential for an emissions trading scheme to apply to road funding in regional areas, which I probably would have done anyway. But that bloke was Andrew Broad. The Victorians may know Andrew. He wandered off into the sunset. But a piece of paper with a bit of pencil on it, $6 billion that saved, because the view was that if you imposed an emissions trading process or a price on carbon on all fuel, that it was supposed to change behaviour, or my view was, and Andrew Broad's was too, I think, was it's not going to move Alice Springs further to Sydney. It's not going to change behaviour, and you can't just impose a blanket taxation arrangement over those circumstances if it's not going to make any difference to the way people operate. So that was a saving of $6 billion. But that was the only thing I got out of the NFF. I remember sitting down with the president, he was having coffee, and he said, oh, this bloody climate change stuff's got us a bit tied up. We said, a lot of us personally agree, but there's a lot of pressure out there. Well, we're still reveling in that, I think. We're going
to David Littleproud addresses the National Press Club tomorrow in Canberra, so that'll be Wednesday, 24th of April. It'll be interesting to see what the leader of the National Party has to say. Question from Anthony Fitzgerald. Do you think the federal government has the legislative balance right between maximising agricultural production and management of natural capital, including soil health and water quality supply? And if not, Tony, what policy settings and areas of reform should be prioritised in the next term of this 48th Parliament to protect the needs of farmers, food production, rural communities, the economy and the environment?
I made a couple of notes on this. This sort of question. I've been out of it. Well, the last thing I want to be is a sort of bastion of knowledge. I'm not. But in terms of the current government, I don't think the ministers for agriculture, really had their heart in it. And I'd say that probably applies generally to the government. Having said that, other than probably the live sheep stuff out of Western Australia, there's probably nothing they've done terribly wrong in terms of broad policies. But I'm not on day-to-day stuff these days. But, I think we've got to develop. I think we are developing quite sustainable long-term farming systems, and they're the things that will appeal to all political processes. Historically, what we've had, and this is Windsor's view of a murky world, is the beef and sheep producers, for instance, have always relied on getting a friendly politician along to stop something adverse happening to them. I think that it's a generalisation. The grain producers, not so much, and it might go back, who the farmers were and who the graziers were. But if you look at the cotton industry, for instance, they haven't gone down that track at all. And in fact, they're the ones that we should have a good close look at. What they did, the cotton industry, the chemical usage. What did they do? Did they go to a friendly politician and say, listen, we voted for you and here's some money. You're going to allow us to do whatever we want. No, they sat down and they worked out what the issues were. What are we going to have to address? There can be private meetings. It doesn't have to be public meetings. You don't have to show your cards. Where do we want agriculture to be? Where do we want the cotton industry to be? Tailwater return systems came around. Endosulfans taken out of them. The helix debate was addressed. Insect management, crop management, all that stuff. They're in front of the game. They're not asking for political help. They'd like a bit of research money occasionally and that sort of thing, and that's fair enough. That's good. But they've addressed the issues themselves. Some of the other industries wait till the shit hits the fan and then say, oh, this is dreadful. And then they get a friendly politician, he'll get on the screen and say, this is dreadful. How can they do this? And they all vote for them again, and life goes on. Well, I'd suggest that we're probably a bit more mature than that. And now, well, the young people are, we should develop arguments that are logical. And if they're not logical, start looking for your own solution. Don't wait for someone to come along and say, no, it's not right, tell us we can't accept this. Revolt won't work anymore. Political processes are awake to it.
This leads perfectly to a question from Jason Gregory from the Australian Community Media Farm Online. Jason, thank you for this question. In the previous hung parliament from 2010 to 2013, the crossbench seemed to work well together, at least the two lower house rural independents. Expecting an expanded crossbench for the 48th parliament, how can independents retain their independence to get what they want for their individual electorates, as they've stated, but reach the necessary agreement required to form government, aligned with one of the major parties? What I know is, as you've heard, many of the current independents of the 47th Parliament will not be signing agreements relating to supply or confidence. They're going to look at every piece of legislation. You participated in over 270 pieces of legislation between 2010 and 2013. Do independents need to caucus? Do they need, in a way, to form a centre of independence within the federal parliament? There's more than a dozen of them now, Tony. How are they going to better understand, without the constraints of party policies, to be able to better exercise their independence and to be able to better understand legislation?
Well, I think what we're saying is a mass movement on, the two major parties are going to get less than a third of the vote. So there's another third out there. Something's happening. I think people are sick of the two-party system, the way it's operated, the way that people get into the parliament, the way they're financed whilst they're there, all of those things. The founding fathers, when they put the Constitution together, there was no mention of a word party. There was a mention of representatives going to Melbourne in the first instance and then Canberra, going to Parliament and forming a government and getting down there and working things out between them. They were representatives, the House of Representatives, and the Senate was an oversight committee, not an oversight, but a process of overseeing what the other guys are up to.
Yes, House of Review. House of Review.
And I think we're heading back to those days in a sense. But the other part of your question, or Anthony's question, is there is no need for a piece of paper to say that you're going to give a government, a minority government, the nod. If I was in that situation again now, Oakshott and I actually talked about this. What if we don't support either side? I'll tell you what would have happened. The media at the time, it was all going to be chaos and unstable. It'll only last a fortnight. Oh, it's dreadful. It's dreadful. Like going on now. It'll all be chaotic. We looked at it. And because this was the first hung parliament since the 1940s, there'd only been one other at a federal level, the community didn't really understand how all this worked in terms of the parliament. So we thought we were better off to state who we were supportive of, so that it gave some degree of confidence to the community that a parliament could exist under that sort of regime, which it did for the 3 years. Now, if we hadn't done that, and this may well happen in a couple of weeks' time, and just because we're in an election doesn't mean the last parliament is over. The Prime Minister is the Prime Minister until he's not the Prime Minister. So what could have happened in 2010 is that Julia Gillard, who was the Prime Minister, could have convened the Parliament and formed a ministry and said she believes that she has confidence of the House. People think the Governor-General can just race in and do all sorts of things. That's not correct. But if she'd done that, until there was a vote of no confidence in her, she would have remained the Prime Minister. Now, Tony Abbott, who was the opposition leader, opposed everything, but they did that very well. But he never moved a no confidence motion in Julia Gillard over the 3-year period. Never. Now, if a similar scenario exists, whether it be Dutton or Albanese the coming next few weeks, a similar scenario exists. Why would a new parliament made up of independent, well, a minority parliament made up of some independents, why would those independents have a vote of no confidence in a government that hasn't done anything yet? Why would that? I have never, I've been in 2 parliaments, state and federal. I've watched hung parliaments in other states. I've never seen an independent move a frivolous no confidence motion in the government of the day. The oppositions do, but independents don't. So if we hadn't done that in 2010, Julia Gillard would probably have been the Prime Minister for that period of time anyway. And we could see a similar situation develop in a couple of weeks' time.
I want to ask you about, I'm sure someone you remember from your time, Joel Fitzgibbon, the former member for the Hunter, auto electrician by trade, as I was, but country Labor. Do you remember the push where Labor felt in regional Australia, particularly regional New South Wales, that Labor needed to do a better job? Well, that didn't end well, but there are some pretty outstanding Labor members, Newcastle, Dan Rapacoli, Meryl Swanson. There are some people in New South Wales regions that really get it, that are Labor members. we rely on this LNP arrangement. We'll hear from David Littleproud, as I mentioned, the leader of the Nationals at the Press Club tomorrow. But from the perspective of Labor, the incumbent government, assuming that Anthony Albanese does get a second term, what should Labor be doing in regional Australia? And let's start in your home state of New South Wales.
Well, I had a lot to do with Joel Fitzgibbon. The other people I've never met, but we used to meet with, when Parliament was sitting, we'd meet with Joel and Anthony Albanese. And Wayne, not Wayne Swan, can't think of his name, he's the British ambassador at the moment. Anyway, it doesn't matter. But we used to meet every, I think, Tuesday night to talk about what policies were going to, legislation was going to come into the Parliament.
Yep.
So, yeah, I got on well with Joel, but I think he got sidetracked in the Gillard-Rudd issue during that term of Parliament. So I don't know whether the regional issues were so front of mind. There's a lot of people in our Parliament, so they're just there to play politics. You know, it's the rugby union you don't play on the field.
Yeah,
for a lot of people. So, and Joel was one of those. I think that's fine. He was a good representative for his people, but I don't think he had any overarching view of conquering regional Australia. Probably because a lot of people within his own parliamentary party weren't interested in going there. So, you know, if you want to be a player in the mob, you've got to go and hang around where there's a few numbers.
Well, as you remember from your time in state parliament, you know, NSW is not Newcastle, Sydney and Wollongong. You know, it's a big state and you represented your community. Are we going to see now a tightening? Helen Haynes is a great example, as you mentioned, as an independent, and the depth of her community work. It's more than just medicine. It's more than just telecommunication. There's a real transference of information from community to that federal member. And that's what we call them, the community independents. They don't like being called TEALs, but are they setting a new benchmark for the kind of response a federal member of parliament, particularly independent, need in terms of service to their community?
I think they are. I think they want to be above politics. Now, you can't not get involved in some of the political games. It's, you know, if you're in that field, you're going to get impacted by it. But they're not there because of it. A lot of political players in the major parties are there because they loved playing politics at university. They loved watching another guy go down. They're making the incremental gain. At the end of each day that we made so-and-so look ridiculous. Those people aren't there. The Zoe Daniels of this world, they're not there for that reason. And that surprises people because a lot of people want to go into politics now to have a career there. These people don't. Now, one of the things I used to say about being an independent, one of the good things about being an independent is they're not hard to get rid of if they're not doing their work. I've spoken to most of the independents that are standing, and they do have that common thing that they want to be community based and they're sincere about that, and they don't want to be there forever. So people like Lois Angles, if she doesn't get voted in a couple of weeks, she's not going to commit suicide. But the bloke who wants to the job, Tim, what's his name? Not you. Tim Wilson. He's running around and saying, I deserve a career in politics. I deserve a career in politics. Well, he was absolutely useless when he was there. And now he wants to get back in. So, pretty stark choice down there. So look at the character of the people that you're voting for. I think most people would say that these people are fair dinkum.
I think what we're hearing now from the two major parties, you know, they're building the sandbags up in some of those outer Sydney western suburbs. There is exposure to current ministers in the front bench: Tony Berg, Jason Clare, Chris Bowen, three very key cabinet ministers. Are we going to see the likes of Di Lee probably increase her independent vote in the seat of Fowler after Christina Keneally was parachuted in. To your point about, well, it's time for me to have what is my just deserts. These independents seem to have that grassroots connection. Are there lessons for the two major parties from these independents and their success?
Well, I think there is, but they have difficulty getting the message. You know, Andrew Hastie, and I don't know Andrew Hastie at all in Western Australia, but he's just in the last week, he's rebadged himself. He pulled the LNP off his election material and just, you know, vote one Andrew Hastie. I'm the local bloke. Well, they're obviously picking up from their communities that they're sick of this entrenched system where, you know, two major groups funded by the same people have their opportunity to be on one side of the tennis court and the other. I think people are sick of that. But when people say, oh, if it's a hung parliament, nothing will happen, I think we're getting the reform coming from the independents. People, you know, Allegra Spender, for instance, tax reform. Now, we've got to, Ken Henry's been talking about it for years, we've got to address some of these basic flaws in the tax system. The major parties are petrified of it, so they do nothing. And if they can give more money back occasionally. But the real reforms are being talked about by the independents. And that'll be a good thing, because in a hung parliament, the government of the day, whoever it is, will be able to say, well, we probably wouldn't have done this if we were in a majority, but we're in an awkward position now. We've got to start and do something about this. So, and if that happens, that's a positive. If they want to take the credit, that's great. Who cares? As long as it's an advancement in terms of what's become, you know, fairly crazy, you know, tax policy. But yeah, look at the housing situation. Where did all that come from? Yeah, it didn't come from the last 2 or 3 years. It's come from 30 years ago. And I could spend an hour on that, but I won't.
The CEO of Grain Producers Australia, Colin Bettles, is with us on this webinar. Messages to the likes of a Colin Bettles and the rest of those within the spheres of influence in agriculture. Do those men and women need to assemble and get together once knowing the outcome of this federal election on May 3? Do they need to get a consensus approach from an agriculture point of view? No disrespect to the NFF or to others, but to actually start setting an agenda for agriculture, and their first sphere of influence and contact will be the crossbench, not only in the lower house, but in the Senate. Is that the kind of approach that organisations need to take?
Well, I think the farm sector needs to get to know. It's just assume it is a hung parliament, for argument's sake. But even if it's not, I think it's valuable anyway. The farm sector needs to get to know who these people are, and they shouldn't be just walking in the door when there's a contentious issue. We need help. We want you to stop this, or we want to, there's a windmill in the back paddock. I want it stopped. Some housing development's going to take place. I want you to stop it. Get to know them personally and include the Senate in that, because if there is a hung parliament or not, the independents in the lower house will communicate with the independents and crossbenchers in the upper house, as they will with the government parties and opposition parties in the upper house. That happens. That's the sort of organics of the parliament. You don't just sit there on your own and not talk to anybody else. You talk to as many people as you can to get a fairly balanced view. And Pocock, as I mentioned earlier, is brilliant at that. Now, he doesn't fully understand, in my view, all of the parts of agriculture as well, but he's got an agricultural background, and he'd be one of the people I'd be inviting out on the real farms, not with the NFF waving some political flag, real people talking about their business program, their sustainable agricultural entity, what it all involves, how it works, and a number of issues will come out of that. And that obviously, the use of chemicals and all of those things will be part of that debate. But just get to know these people. One thing a mate of mine said the other day was, I told him I was going to be on this thing. What's your advice to the farm sector? And he said, find out if you're lobbying a member of parliament, if you want them to do something for you, find out what they're involved in at the moment. And if they're up to their armpits in stuff, don't annoy them, because they'll, just the sheer time, they'll push you aside. Yeah, let them know, look, I see you're pretty busy at the moment. Can I come back in a fortnight's time? And you can be back in a fortnight's time. Don't treat anybody arrogantly. Even though they mightn't understand your issue, they get a vote on it. And it's your job to educate them on what that issue is. Don't get captured in the political process. And that's agriculture's for 30 years.
In the minutes we've got, in the minutes we've got remaining, Tony, there's no question that you'd probably agree that democracy is actually better for this fracturing of the vote. It seems politicians work a heck of a lot harder. Are we going to see this kind of building of independent numbers in the lower house and the federal parliament as a set in concrete thing, that the vote is not for turning, that we will never see those 40+% primary votes for the red and blue team again?
Well, that depends how the major parties start to address the substantive issues. But being Tweedledum and Tweedledee isn't working for them, obviously. But one thing that does work in politics is political competition. And country people have suffered because they've stayed loyal to people who have never done anything for them. That's the reality of the political. Loyalty in politics is never rewarded. The safe seats don't get anything. The marginal seats get attention. And you're going to see it played out with Alex Dyson and in Wannon, for instance. Yeah, he's focusing on what hasn't happened in his electorate for years and years and years. Now, it hasn't had to have happened in that electorate because people kept voting the same people back in. So country people are very loyal, and that's a good thing, but it's not rewarded in politics. Political competition is. Now, if there is a hung parliament and there's a number of more independents get into the parliament, people will judge their performance. And so they should. And if they're not doing the job, they get rid of them. If the parties suddenly wake up that there's more important things to do and focus on what people are actually saying, well, good luck to them too. But it's a breath of fresh air coming down the corridor in terms of our political debate. A lot of people say, oh, it's going to be so hard to manage and they'll all be over the place, be like herding cats. You watch it, it won't be at all. There's some pretty intelligent people in this.
Well, you said that in 2010. You had the media, you had those groups saying this parliament's not going to last. Just before I throw to Colin Bettles, the CEO of Grain Producers Australia, to offer you a vote of thanks, have you ever considered the Tony Windsor Centre of Independence, where they can all come along to you and not sit at the altar, my friend, but over a cold one or a coffee table, just lean and get that kind of experience that you can offer, certainly to these new, young federal members of parliament, some of whom will be there for the first time, some going back for their second term, and of course Zali Steggall seeking to get re-elected in the seat of Warringah, where she knocked off the former Prime Minister Tony Abbott. But have you ever thought of the Windsor Centre of Independence?
No, I'm sorry. I'm happy to talk to anybody. Well, I love talking to people, but no, I won't get into it.
Tony, it's been great talking to you, and I'll let Colin give our vote of thanks to all our viewers that have been watching, and thank you so much for your time today, Tony.
Thanks, Tim. All the best.
Yeah, thanks, Tim, for hosting. Thanks everyone for listening in. tonight, and thanks to Tony. Well, thank you, Rachel, from our team for setting up the technology here and helping host tonight. But Tony, thank you very much. Some very wise words in there, and hopefully that helps people on our side of the fence in the ag sector navigate minority government better, or even if it's a majority government, just to be better advocates for our sector. And I can't leave without asking you one question, Tony. What do you think is going to happen on election night? And will we have a hung parliament? Thank you.
Thanks, Col. My guess is we probably will. If that doesn't happen, Labor will have a majority of a couple. There's certain indicators that you tend to watch in politics, and you probably watch them as well as I do. And someone might ask David Littleproud tomorrow about this. But when the National Party come out with a lot of money in terms of promises during an election period, and they did that last week, this new future fund, and it's going to fund this and fund that. Yeah, begs the question, why hasn't it happened before, if it's such a good idea? But they know they can't win. You can throw money around like confetti if you know you haven't got to spend it. And it gives you the argument once you're in opposition again to say, well, if you'd elected us, we would have a future fund, you would have got this, that, and the other thing. So it's this perpetual debate that goes on. So I think it's highly unlikely that Peter Dutton and co can win from where they are, and given the indicators that are out there. But before I do go, Colin, thank you for having me. One thing, as a farmer, I want you to do, and I'm sure there's other farmers listening, and others will say, listen to this idiot. We need to do something with a cereal that nodulates nitrogen. Now, I know around the world people have been looking at it for decades, and I know when they go to the scientific community say, well, it's probably technically possible, but we're not there yet. We're going to face issues, and it's one of those issues coming down the track where particularly nitrogenous fertilisers, but not only, are going to become extraordinarily expensive. They are now, and there'll be pressures in terms of entering streams and those sorts of things. Why aren't we pushing more to get more research done into why this can't happen? We can produce legumes, we can grow chickpeas, for instance. We can do that. There's lucerne, there's a whole range of peas in there. Why can't we get a cereal that actually does that? And maybe we need to focus some research on that solves a number of issues as we do it. But if you could do that within a week, it'd be nice.
There's some homework for Colin.
Thanks. We'll follow up. Definitely, that's contained in our election policy document. We're going to plan to optimise the returns we get from our research investment levies. And number one, starting with Tony's request again. And I have followed up on that for you previously, but I'll double.
Thanks, Colin.
Just again, thank you to Tony Windsor for your appearance here for Grain Producers Australia webinar. Thank you, Colin Bettles. Thank you to Rachel, and thank you to all of our audience and your questions that you sent through. Don't forget, vote early. Don't vote often, just once. But May 3, a lot to be decided for the Commonwealth of Australia and the formation of the 48th Parliament and the power of independence in that Parliament. Good night to you all, and look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thanks, Tim. Great job. Thanks, Tony.